This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. And my guest today, Bethany Shelton, who I found on podmatch.com. And I always have to cheer them on because if it weren't for Podmatch, Bethany, we probably wouldn't have met. And there's so much in your bio that I truly relate to. And I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to tell people it's going to be in the show notes. Please read Bethany's background because you just said something so profound before we got started that what you've gone through in your life has brought you to where you have to be today. And I totally agree. I say the same thing about my life. And today I was writing a blog thinking, God, why did I feel so terrible 10 years ago, 20 years ago? And then I'm thinking, well, maybe I had to realize that those things aren't as terrible as I thought, or they are, but this is how I got through them. So one of the things I want people to understand is that many of us who podcast and coach, we do it because we have the experience. It's not the certifications, although certifications sometimes lead people to us. But the reality of it is, I don't think we would be good coaches, guest speakers, if we didn't really have the vulnerable backstory to bring to you. So, Bethany, tell us your story and take us on your journey.
Wow. Wow. What a journey this has absolutely been for me. Um, First off, thank you so much, Karen, for bringing me onto your podcast, allowing me to be a part of your guests and experiences. I'm just absolutely so grateful for that. A little bit about Bethany is back in about third grade. Um, my parents just were like any other parent. My teachers came to them and told them that I was on the spectrum for ADD, ADHD, for them to go get me tested. And so, as great parents would, they took me to a psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed with ADD, ADHD. They put me on medications of Ritalin and Adderall. And in that experience, I was going to school, and the kids at school noticed a change in me. And I began to get made fun of because I was literally a zombie. I would just sit there and just so I was present but not aware, you know what I mean? And these drugs were really affecting me, and I was starting to have almost, in a sense, traumatic experience, being made fun of, blame, shame, guilt. And I was like, Mom, Dad, you got to get me off this medicine. I can't do it. Well, they, as parents, they thought, I really needed it still. And but one day I bit into a hamburger, and they had hidden the medicine in my food. In that moment, I felt absolute rage. I was upset. I felt betrayed. Um, and I started to act out in a way because I felt, just so betrayed. So a few years had passed, and I got off the medicine. But in that time, by them medicating me, it told Bethany that it is not okay for her to be herself. Society did not accept her. The only way that society would accept her is if she was drug medicated. And so for many years of my life, I went down a road of drugs and alcohol, thinking that that's the only way that I could show up for myself and be accepted. So then in 2000, I had a child, Cavan, and we had a great, family life. And on in 2020, I got a call to come out into a parking lot. I was asked to leave my job, and my family met me out in a parking lot. And I was like, man, this is awful weird. They don't come to my job. They don't, at the time, they didn't even know where I work. I didn't think they knew where I worked. And I get out to the car, And I sit down and my mom said, Bethany, we need to tell you something. I said, okay. And that was when my life changed in like that. They told me that my only child was killed in a head-on collision instantly. And still to this day, when I speak about this, I can remember, I can feel, I can hear, I can sense the sound of the scream I let out in that moment and collapsed to the floor. My world had just went whoop,
Absolutely.
and I was devastated, absolutely devastated. And I found for that first year, I was in absolute grief beyond grief. I didn't know how I was going to get through this, why this had happened to me, anger, judgment, blame, shame, guilt, all of it. And the day that I buried him, I asked God and I asked Cavan, please, I need some kind of sign that everything, that you're okay. And I'm walking back from the burial, and my best friend of 36 years is holding my hand. And it's a cloudy day, cloudy day. And in that moment, the clouds separated and a rainbow popped through. And I just fell. I was overwhelmed at that time. I just started bawling, and I felt for the first time some sense of peace and love just for that few short seconds.
Sure.
But that was a magical moment that I got to experience, to recognize later on down the healing journey. So yeah, that's what kind of brought me into what I'm doing now, why I'm on this field, out here doing helping others, is to show that there's a different possibility coming.
It's interesting. You made the comment about as soon as you heard your world fall apart, which we would expect. Okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
people around us don't know how to relate to that. It's like, come on, Bethany, get back up. We want to help you. Nobody can help you at that moment in time. You're the only one who can get there, and you have to get there at your speed. And especially when it's that traumatic. I mean,
Yeah.
How old was your son at the time?
He was 2 weeks before he turned 20. And that was, of course, right at COVID. And he was supposed to be off to college, but they only had, in-house schooling. Right. He could only, that he couldn't go off to college. So yeah, my son it still is the biggest nerd I know,
And I love how you talk about your son. Something I didn't understand up until about 12 years ago. The first person who I actually interviewed who had lost a child kept speaking of the fact that she had 5 children. In my mind, she had 4 children. She had lost 1. And I came right out and asked, I said, okay, this is going to sound like a stupid question, but you're claiming you have 5 children. She said, yes, he's still my child. He may not be living on this earth. He's still my child. And from that moment on, I started to totally understand that we need to keep those lives within us, not to bring us down, but to remind us of
the amazing awareness that you just said, Karen, because, Cavan brought it to me like this. He said, Mom, when I was on a physical plane, and I'm talking to you like I am right now, Karen, we were like, on the same frequency and everything. He said, but Mom, when I crossed over, I rose and you dropped in, guilt, blame, shame, grief. He said, Mom, do you see how hard it is for us to communicate? And I was like, what? And I still talk as if my son is alive or present, because he is. Death, it was just the death of his body, as we all know that we're infinite beings, and energy doesn't die, it only transforms. It
Right.
cannot be created nor destroyed, it only transforms. So when he started bringing me this information and communications through these wild connections that I had no idea was even possible. I'll give you a few.
Sure.
It just gets so crazy. So one day it was back in 2021. I said, I need to go get off this couch. I'm going to go get in the shower. I pull back the shower curtain. I look down in the shower and there's a quarter. And I was like, well, I don't know about you, Karen, but I
Yep.
don't shower with
Yeah.
coins or
Yeah.
pockets and I thought, I was like, well, this is interesting, but I just kind of threw it to the side. But I looked at the coin and the coin had his death year on it. Okay. So a few days had passed and I was getting out of bed. And as I do each morning, I make my bed and get everything tidy. Well, that night I come to pull my sheets back and get in it. There's coins inside of my bed. And I'm like, now this is odd. The next morning I get out of bed and there's coins on my floor. And I'm like, man, what in the world is going on here? Well, I guess about a week and a half had passed and I was vacuuming the floor, vacuum the whole house. I go put the vacuum up. I come back in the living room and look down on my freshly vacuumed floor. There's coins on the floor. Now, I just vacuumed that floor. There's no way that these coins should have been there.
Right.
What is going on? So I looked at the coins and one of them had his birth year on it. I was like, what in the world? So I called my mom. I was like, Mom, I don't know what in the world's going on. I am finding these coins everywhere. She said, oh my gosh, Bethany, we are too. There's pennies, dimes, nickels all over everywhere. We're finding them. And I was like, what? And I said, uh, what is she's mom's like, I think Cavan's trying to communicate with us. And I was like, what? So I walked out onto the deck and I was like, Cavan, I'm crying. I am so just like, what is going on? And I said, Cavan, if this is you, buddy, could you show up for me like a bluebird or a redbird? The very next day, Karen, everywhere I went and everywhere I turned, there was a blue jay and a cardinal everywhere I turned. And I was like, oh my gosh, this child is trying to communicate with me. And I started to just get excited. In that moment, I felt a connection. I was like, well, this is absolutely unheard of for me. I didn't know this was even possible. I haven't experienced, death like this. Who knew? Well, my son started to ramp it up and really come through in even more magical ways and through synchronicities, messages. His dad and I were sitting on a couch one day and we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, on his dad's locked phone, one of his favorite songs started playing, and we could not get this thing to stop. And I look at him and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is wild. And I would start to really become aware of myself and my thoughts because I started to see when I got excited, things started happening more. Well, then the lights would flicker, and then his dog would look at his picture and start barking and shaking his head and getting excited like he was playing. And I was like, this is magical. This is awesome. So yeah, those are a few of the signs that I knew that he was there and close.
So is this
Yeah.
how you help individuals? Because I know, I think even though I lost my grandparents,
Mhm.
I didn't, they were older.
Mhm.
I lost them. Yes, what they said, but there was no real need to reconnect, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And when my father passed away, my mother was still alive, and my concern was getting her through all this, although she was a strong woman and she didn't need anybody. She just got through it. When my mother got ill and passed away, to this day, and that was in 2016, I still talk to her. Not necessarily out loud, but I can be sitting here and having this conversation with her. And I went through grief counseling because I thought, what is wrong with me? And through the grief counseling, they said, how are you feeling about it? And I said, I feel great about it. They said, the number one, you don't need to be here because you're doing okay. Okay. And you have that energy force with your mother that you didn't have with your grandparents, that you didn't have with your father. And the first thing they said was, don't think it doesn't mean that you didn't love them, didn't care about them, but you have this energy force with your mother. And so use it, continue with it. And my youngest son has the exact same thing with my mother. And it's quite interesting how he will just call me up some days and say, Mom, and it was like he just had this conversation. He'll say, Bobby just told me that what you talked to me about yesterday may not be what I really needed to hear. And he would explain it in the words that she would have said. And I'll be sitting here going, okay. And so he's got that energy force too. Most of us don't understand that.
Well, we weren't taught that. We weren't taught anything about this. Cavan and my spirit teams brought to me the awareness. Bethany, go research Disney movies and grief. Now, when I found this information out, I was absolutely blown away, Karen. Now, I know as a child, for me, I have a 6 month old, 6 month older cousin to me, and she would always come over and we would hang out, on the weekends and, summer break, we were always together. And I can remember as a child, Disney and turning on a vision that's telling you a vision through sight and sound. You turn on, dial in with and see what program you're going to watch. And then you download it into your conscious and subconscious through repetition, through visual and audio, right? Telling you a vision.
Yeah.
So when Cavan and my teams are like, research Disney and holiday movies that we all watched growing up, Lion King. Lion King teaches you blame, shame, and guilt and grief. Simba is blamed for his father's death. He's casted out and into the Badlands because he didn't get it right. Then you have Frozen, blame, shame, guilt, fear, grief. Bambi, blame, shame, guilt, fear, grief. Finding Nemo, Dumbo, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Pocahontas, Rudolph, The Grinch, A Christmas Carol, Home Alone, Frosty the Snowman, and Polar Express are all lower aspects of blame, shame, grief, less than, not enough, worry, fear, anxiety, and hurt. Now, when we watch this, we are taught that this is how you act and be, right?
Right.
And you're downloading it. It's your program. It's telling you a vision. And what we think about, we bring about. What we bring about, we experience. And I was absolutely floored at this. We were taught how to grieve and experience life through lower aspects of frequency. And, how can we communicate and operate with higher frequency when we're stuck in lower? That's not a thing. That can't happen. I mean, You know, if you want to see a change, you got to be the change. And that's, when that awareness came in, that blew my mind. I had no idea that the television was telling me a vision. And through the programming, I was downloading and thinking that that was the way to operate.
I never, and I'm so glad you brought that up because we do another show here called Grief Believe. And what in that we have three grief coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing is we let people know, number one, there's no one way to grieve.
No.
We're not taught what grief really is.
Right.
The first time I truly saw grief, and I didn't see it, I heard about it. My aunt lost her brother at a young
Yeah.
age. And at the cemetery, she threw herself, on the casket, crying like it was all about her. Now, my aunt was a very dramatic person. And as
Yeah.
it turns out, that was done for drama. But the
Mhm.
sad part is that the people around her who were truly grieving stopped because they were worried about her.
Mm-hmm.
And what we talk about in Grief Belief is that we can't judge other people for how they react.
Exactly.
That's a personal reaction. And if hers was traumatized, that was her choice. That's what she needed to do at that moment in time. And so when I go back and I think about those things, I've lost friends, I've lost relatives, and each one I have grieved differently.
Yeah.
And that's all right.
Yeah,
And
for
I,
sure.
and I think it's all right for you to have found this energy that says, yeah, I'm grieving the fact that he's not here, but I'm celebrating the fact that we're connected.
That's exactly right. And how Cavan brought it to me and my teams, they were like, what if death isn't about losing somebody, but finding a different way to communicate?
I love that. I love that.
And it comes in different ways. It's not going to come in the way that we've done it in the physical form, like how I'm talking to you. It comes in other ways, but to be aware of those moments is for me. How I did it was I had to shut my mind off and get into my heart. Healing is feeling. And there's no, like you said, there's no right or wrong way. But for me, what helped me the most is when I felt those feelings of just grief and loss and separation, I allowed it. I accepted, I sat in it, and whatever came, great, not great, but just I allowed it to flow and allowed it to go without saying I should have, I ought to, this is wrong, this is right. It just is. And it's
Absolutely.
okay. But, that was the biggest thing for me is just allowance and shutting the mind off and healing is feeling. So, yeah,
So,
yeah.
how do you help other individuals now? Because you've taken your journey, and obviously you needed to go through those things to become the person you are today.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a hard thing to say to people. They go, "Oh, so I had to lose my son to become, this person I am today." Maybe you didn't have to, but that perpetuated who you are today. So now, how are you helping others?
I'm helping others is we're going to find out what are your awarenesses? What are you paying attention to? What you think about, you bring about. When you look at photos, what do you see? Do you see the loss or do you see the joy in what you are visually looking at? When I look at my son's picture, I see the smile. I see the frequency. I see what he's displaying with me and I get excited to connect with the smile and his heart in that picture. I don't look at what I've lost. I looked at, oh, wow, I get to still share his smile.
Right.
And so we deep dive into what is it you are giving your attention and awareness to most of the time. Is it in the grief, blame, shame, hurt, or are you willing and able to take a look at higher frequency, what it is to feel like to heal? What are you choosing for yourself? What do you want to do? Do you want to stay locked and stop? Or is there a different aspect that you're willing to take a look at? Look at some of the limiting beliefs. Look at your frequency. Well, we go through frequency healing, sound healing, through sight, sound, and so yeah, that's some of the main points that we do.
It's interesting because you use the word that is so important, limiting beliefs, and we
Mhm.
don't really understand that that's what we're doing. I remember when my aunt's husband passed away. I think I was about 9 or 10 years old, and my whole life I remembered either my aunt was with my uncle or my aunt was with my mother. Okay, so that was her life. And after my uncle Ben passed away, my aunt invited me to come spend the night at her house. And I was all excited. I got to be alone with her, no mother, no uncle. This is great. And again, I was like 9 years old, and she had this big king size bed, and she asked if I wanted to sleep in the bed with her. And I thought, okay. But the question I asked her was, what side did Uncle Ben sleep on? And she told me, and I said, can I sleep on your side?
Yeah.
And I remember her asking me why. And I said, well, I'm afraid to sleep on his side because my 9-year-old brain was telling me I was going to die if I slept on his side.
Oh,
So I slept on her side. But years later, the two of us had to talk about it. And she said, I want to thank you for asking me to sleep on his side of the bed. Because I felt his warmth at night. And so she experienced the energy. Okay.
Mhm.
I was thinking as a 9-year-old, it's going to be negative to me. I can't do that. And here, years later, she remembered it and said, thank you. And that was the first time I realized that, well, he wasn't holding her, he wasn't there. But that had to have been his energy and his energy. And she would say for many years
Mhm.
that she continued to sleep on that side of the bed because that's when she felt him. And so I know it's real. I've talked to
Yeah.
so many people in this life that we get to choose what we want to believe too. And that's what makes us whole.
Yes. And what what if your crossed over loved one or your spirit team, God, source, however, the angelics, the galactics, the indigenous, the ancestral energies and guides are trying to communicate with you, but you're so locked, blocked, and stopped that you're unaware about this. And so, connection is possible. Connection is very much possible. Energy is here, and just knowing thyself, knowing your heart, mind, and spirit is one of the greatest gifts that you can give not only to yourself but to your family members.
Absolutely. So, how can my listeners find you and follow you and um, get some of the energy that you have?
Yes, girl, come get into this frequency. Woo! Yeah, you can follow me at Limitless Now.com. I have a free gift when you come to the site. Download a 7-day journal turning pain into purpose. And yeah, that I'm on TikTok at Bee Limitless Now. So yeah, that's how you connect with me.
Well, we're
Book
going
you
to
a
have
free
all that.
call and see what we can do, what great magic we can create.
I love that. So, all this information, everyone, is in the show notes. So, there's no excuse to say, hey, I didn't catch what Bethany just said, because just read the notes. That's not a problem. If you totally forget to read the notes, you can always contact us at newclevelandradio@gmail.com. I'm going to stay in touch with Bethany because I believe her story needs to go on grief belief, because until I actually went through grief coaching, I didn't understand some of the grief that I was carrying around with me. And it wasn't the grief of death, it was many other things. And we grieve over lots of things. And especially as we age, we grieve about, oh, what did I look like when I was 20? Oh, that job I had when I was 40. Grief is real.
But what if you're carrying grief from past lives, past experiences, other people's that you might not even, energy and frequency is a very tricky thing at times if you're unaware of how it works. I mean, what if like you're going to the grocery store and you were fine going into the grocery store, but you have an energetic electromagnetic field that precedes you 6 feet and 360 degrees thing. And when you shimmy and shake next to all these beans in the grocery store, what's in their field now could jump off in your field, and they might be negative Nancy that is, in the worst despair. How that energetic residue could hop off into your field, and you will start now thinking, feeling, and being things that you don't even resonate. You're like, what is that? But until you get to know your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and knowing thyself, and getting in your heart and healing and feeling, you won't even understand or be aware that other beings can affect your thought processes and your frequency.
Well, this discussion is going to continue on other podcasts. I'm so excited about it. Thank you, Bethany, for being with me today, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Karen. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.